He learned to stay silent in childhood, not because he was asked to, but because every time he told the truth, something broke. In his family, they didn't like uncomfortable questions. They didn't like emotions. They didn't like it when he said, "I'm hurting." So he understood early on, silence was safer. He carried that silence into adulthood, into work, into friendships, and worst of all, into love. Her name was Liana. She didn't appear loudly, no fireworks, no dramatic first meeting. One day, they simply found themselves sitting at the same small cafe table, both waiting for a rain that had been falling for 3 hours straight. "Is it always like this here?" she asked, looking out the window. "Yes," he said, "but sometimes it feels like it's not rain. It's a pause." She smiled, and in that moment, he felt something warm. Not love, not a spark, something familiar. As if, next to her, he didn't have to rush. They started seeing each other slowly. No big words, no promises. He listened more than he spoke. She talked, and it seemed to be enough for her. "You're so calm," she said once. "It's easy to be with you." He nodded, but inside he thought, "You just can't hear my noise." Months passed. He was there. He helped. He remembered the small things, but he didn't talk about himself. When she asked, "What are you thinking about?" he answered, "Nothing important." When she asked, "Are you happy?" he said, "Of course, of course." Even though the word happy had long ago lost any clear meaning for him, he wasn't lying. He was just leaving things unsaid. And the unsaid has a strange way of piling up. Liana was patient. But patience is not endless. She began to notice the little things. How he froze before answering. How he changed the subject. How he smiled when he should have been angry. "It feels like you're always half a step behind," she said one evening. "Like you're here, but not really." He wanted to tell the truth about the fear, about being afraid of becoming a burden, about not knowing how to be open without losing himself. But instead, he stayed silent. And that silence started to hurt not only him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay beside her, listening to her breathing, thinking, how long can you stay quiet before you disappear? He didn't know yet that this thought would become the beginning of the end, and at the same time, the beginning of something far more frightening. Not losing her, something shifted. Nothing dramatic happened. No arguments. No slammed doors. Just a quiet distance that slowly learned how to breathe between them. Liana was still there. She still asked how his day was. Still laughed at small things, still reached for his hand in public, but her eyes began to linger on him longer than before, as if she was waiting for something to finally surface. He noticed it. He always noticed everything. That was the problem. He noticed, but he didn't respond. At work, people trusted him. They called him reliable, stable, the man who never panicked. They didn't know that stability was something he performed, not something he felt. He learned early how to become useful instead of honest. When Liana started talking about her childhood, about her fears, about the parts of herself she didn't like, he listened carefully. He remembered everything. But when she paused and looked at him, silently inviting him in, he stayed on the outside. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she said one night, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch. "I know," he answered. But knowing something and believing it are very different things. Inside him lived a constant tension, the fear that if he spoke too much, he would become too much, too heavy, too complicated, too disappointing. So he kept choosing silence, convincing himself it was kindness. Weeks passed, then months. The silence didn't scream, it eroded. Liana began to withdraw in small ways. She stopped asking certain questions, stopped waiting for his reactions, stopped filling the space when conversations died. That scared him more than anger ever could. One evening she said, "I feel like I'm talking at you, not with you." He opened his mouth and closed it again. "I don't know how to let you in," he finally said. She looked at him, not angry, not sad, just tired. "I'm already here," she replied. "I just don't know where you are." That night, he walked the city alone, no destination, just streets and lights and the sound of his own steps. He realized something painful. He had spent his entire life avoiding conflict and still ended up alone with it. Silence had protected him once from disappointment, from rejection. But now it was slowly dismantling everything he cared about. He thought about telling her everything, about the nights he felt empty, about how emotions scared him because they always demanded something back, about how he never learned the language of vulnerability. But fear kept interrupting every sentence before it could form. A week later, she said the words he had been avoiding. "I don't feel connected anymore." Not accusing, not dramatic, just honest. He nodded. That nod hurt more than any argument. "I don't want to leave," she said quietly, "but I can't stay with someone who isn't really here." For the first time in a long while, he felt something rise in his chest. Panic, regret, clarity. "I'm here," he said too late. "I just don't know how to show it." She touched his hand, gently, like a goodbye disguised as comfort. "I hope one day you learn," she said, "because you feel deeply. I can see that. You just hide it from yourself." When the door closed behind her, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt loud. Every unspoken word suddenly had space to echo. That night, he sat on the floor, back against the couch, the same place she had sat weeks earlier. And for the first time, he didn't try to silence the noise inside. He let it stay. Because somewhere deep down, he understood. Silence had shaped him, but it didn't have to define him. And learning to speak might be the hardest thing. Felt unreal, not empty, unfamiliar. The apartment looked the same, but nothing belonged to him the way it used to. Even the silence felt borrowed. He stood in the kitchen holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. He didn't remember making it. That scared him more than he wanted to admit. For years, he had believed that control meant safety, that if he kept his emotions quiet, manageable, tucked away, nothing could break. But standing there alone, he understood something slowly, painfully clear. Nothing had broken him. He had simply disappeared from his own life. Work continued. Emails, meetings, nods of approval. Everyone said he seemed fine. He hated that word. Fine had been the place where all his feelings went to die. At night, he replayed conversations with Liana. Not the fights, but the quiet moments he had dismissed as unimportant. The pauses, the looks, the moments where she waited for him to step forward. He never did. He told himself he was protecting her from his confusion, his heaviness, his unfinished thoughts. But now he saw the truth. He was protecting himself from being seen. One evening, weeks later, he found an old notebook in a drawer. It wasn't a journal. He wasn't that kind of man, or so he thought. It was filled with fragments, single sentences, half-finished thoughts. "I feel too much, but I don't know how to explain it. I'm afraid if I speak, I won't be understood. Silence feels safer than hope." He didn't remember writing most of it. That terrified him, because it meant he had always known. He just never allowed himself to finish a thought out loud. So he started small. Not with her, with himself. He began naming things. "I'm lonely. I'm afraid. I miss her." The words felt clumsy, like a language he'd heard his whole life but never practiced. Some nights he spoke them out loud, just to hear how they sounded in the room. They didn't break anything. They didn't collapse the world. They just existed. That realization changed something fundamental. Months passed. The city moved on. People came and went. Life stayed busy. But inside him, something slowed down. He stopped filling every quiet moment with noise. Stopped pretending he didn't feel things deeply. He started therapy, something he used to think was for people worse off than him. He learned that strength wasn't the absence of emotion. It was the ability to stay present when emotion arrived. One afternoon, he ran into Liana by accident. A bookstore. Late autumn light filtering through dusty windows. She looked different, calmer, more settled. So did he. They stood there for a moment, unsure which version of themselves was allowed to speak. "How are you?" she asked. This time, he didn't say fine. "I'm learning," he said. She smiled, not out of nostalgia, but recognition. They talked, not about getting back together, Not about fixing the past, just about who they had become. He told her things he had never said before, not to win her back, not to rewrite history, just because they were true. I didn't know how to be present, he admitted, and I'm sorry it took losing you to understand that. She listened quietly. I never needed you to be perfect, she said. I just needed you to be real. That sentence stayed with him long after they said goodbye. They didn't promise anything. They didn't need to. Some endings are not meant to be undone, only understood. That night, he walked home slowly. The city felt different now. Not softer, not kinder, just less overwhelming. He realized something important. He hadn't lost her because he was incapable of love. He lost her because he was afraid to let love hear his voice. And while that regret would always live somewhere inside him, it no longer defined him. Because now, when silence came, he didn't hide behind it. He listened. And when words rose, shaky and uncertain, he let them exist. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. Some people learn early how to speak their truth. Others learn after the cost becomes impossible to ignore. He was the second kind. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a beginning.